Questions without notice. Are there any questions? I'll give the call to the Honourable the Leader. Order. Order. The front bench will cease interjecting immediately. I give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Why did the Prime Minister repeatedly promise to cut power bills before the election, but has never mentioned this promise since the election? Given the Prime Minister once stated, and I quote, "If you make a promise and a commitment, you do have to stick to it." Why does he say one thing before the election and another after it? How can Australians be expected to believe anything the Prime Minister says when it comes to the cost of living challenges facing Australian families?
I give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition, and I welcome him back to the playing field after being. He was the Neil Fraser of the Opposition yesterday. He was the non-playing captain, just observing the team. But today he's back, and that's a very good thing that he's back.
Order.
Of course, we inherited, as the Leader of the Opposition is aware, a circumstance where we had the Russian invasion of Ukraine
and Henkler,
and we also had supply chain issues, something that was identified indeed by the Leader of the Opposition.
Order.
So I refer the Leader of the Opposition to his own comments. About supply chain issues, the impact they are having on inflation, and also to the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Prime Minister will pause. I'll just hear from the Leader of the Opposition a point of order.
Well, it's on relevance, Mr Speaker. This was a question about the Prime Minister's truthfulness. Why can't he be believed? He says one thing before an election and does complete opposite.
May resume your seat. The question was about commitments before the election. It was about the issue of cost of living. It was in anyone's interpretation, quite a broad question. The Prime Minister is being relevant. If he's not, I'll pull him into line to the question and give him the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition said this about inflation. Said this. It's a reality of a world where there's inflation. I think Australians understand that. There's a lot of pressure, upward pressure on interest rates at the moment. He went on to say that. The Shadow Finance Minister went on to say, we know the pressures that the international situation and supply chains are putting on inflation and subsequently interest rates.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
The Shadow Finance Minister, personally chosen by the Leader of the Opposition, had that to say in March 2023, in a moment of clarity, and a moment of honesty. And they come in here and pretend something very different.
The Leader of the Nationals, when the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for Newcastle.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How will the Albanese government's safeguard mechanism reform strengthen our economy, and what's been the response of the passage of this through the House yesterday?
Good. The call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for the question. I know how proud she is to be the member for one of the great industrial and energy powerhouses of our nation, Mr Speaker. And I know that her Hunter colleagues and her Illawarra colleagues and all the regional colleagues on this side of the House know that the regions that have powered Australia and have been the economic centre of Australia for so long will be the centre of a renewable Australia as well. And they know we have to seize the opportunities. And increasingly, Mr Speaker, economic success for industries and for countries will be determined by those countries that have the best framework for decarbonisation. Investors will demand it, insurers will demand it, and consumers demand it as well. So increasingly, economic success and climate success are interlinked. And that's why the passage of the Safeguard Bill through the House yesterday and its passage through the Senate later this week will be so important for our future. And it has, the honourable member asked me about the response, it has been welcomed across the business community because What the Albanese government is doing this week has received the support of the Business Council and the Climate Council. It's received the support of the ACF and the AIG, the Australian Conservation Foundation and the Australian Industry Group. That's what this government works so hard on, getting the policy right to reduce emissions and to increase economic activity. The Business Council said that it is a tough but achievable framework that the government has announced yesterday. The II Group, the Australian Industry Group, said the treatment of new facilities appears to strike a workable balance, providing pathways for new projects that stack up to go ahead without adding burdens to existing facilities or threatening national emissions goals. The Investor Group on Climate Change has said the reforms will help unlock investment in new and existing industries that will maximise Australia's competitive advantages in a net zero world. That's what the business community thinks about these reforms. Now, those opposite think they know business better than the Business Council. Those opposite think they know industry better than the Australian Industry Group. The Shadow Minister was asked this morning.
Member for Hume.
He was railing against safeguard reforms, and it was put to him by Laura Jays, well, business disagrees. How do you square that away? And he said, well, you might say business disagrees. There are some business associations that have supported the principle, but that wasn't his best answer. He was then asked, you did sign up to net zero. How are you going to get there? His response, great question. Great question. Well, while he's asking great questions, the Albanese government's delivering on the job.
Member for Fairfax. Order. The member for Hume will resume his seat. The member for Fairfax. Order. Members on my right will cease interjecting. Members on my right, the Deputy Prime Minister will cease interjecting. The member for Fairfax. I can hear his interjections. If he continues to do so, he'll be warned. Give the call to the member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, data realised by Finder shows that more than a third of Australians with a mortgage are struggling to make their mortgage payments as a result of Labor's rising interest rates. Will this out-of-touch Prime Minister finally admit that Australian families always pay more under Labor?
Order. I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. And I thank the substitute question of number 2. It comes as some surprise that they're mixing it up today.
And the member for Hume will cease interjecting.
And I'm asked about housing and the cost of housing, and I say to the member who asked the question that he does have an opportunity to do something on housing, which is to support the Housing Australia Future Fund that is before this parliament now. Because what the Housing Australia Future Fund, along with the Housing Accord and along with other measures, is aimed at doing, of course, is increasing supply of housing that has an impact on price. Economics 101
member for Groom
has an impact. Now,
the member for Groom will cease interjecting, and the member for Hume.
There is massive support out there. The Property Council of Australia.
The Prime Minister is answering a question about mortgage payments and the cost of living, and he's referencing housing. So I'm going to hear from the member for Deakin.
Thank you,
on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The point of order is relevance. He is speaking about the Housing Australia Future Fund, which has nothing to do
Resume your
with
seat. Resume your seat. The tag at the end of the question about the cost of policies makes what the Prime Minister's saying relevant. If you don't want him to refer to that, don't add the tag to the question. I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Very much. Thanks very much, Mr.
The member
Mr.
for Hume. The Prime Minister will just take a break. The member for Hume. If you interject again, you will be warned. Let's just get back to the question and give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. They've got excited by the change of order, Mr Speaker. The Chief Executive of the Property Council of Australia said this: "The legislation is an important first step to get government working together with industry to bridge the national housing deficit and stimulate new supply that Australia desperately needs." That's the Chief Executive of the Property Council. The Community Housing Industry Association, we need to get moving on building a better supply of social and affordable housing, and this legislation is an important building block. National Shelter, the Housing Australia Future Fund, is a good start to addressing the significant unmet need for social and affordable housing. The National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Housing Association, it would start to address the housing challenge. Homelessness Australia say it's important that the Housing Australia Future Fund get going now. The Housing Industry Association supports the government's goal to build 30,000 social houses and believes it's a worthy goal to get behind. More supply means cheaper rents. The fact is that we have a comprehensive plan on housing. Those opposite, like in everything else, just have a plan to say no.
Order. I'd like to hear from the member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. Why is the passage of the Housing Australia Future Fund so important, and what are the implications if it is delayed in the Senate?
Give a call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Small Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Boothby for her important question. She, of course, in her previous role before coming to this place, dealt with this issue on a day-to-day basis, and I thank her for all of the work she's done in that community. Because she, of course, does support the Housing Australia Future Fund, because she understands the challenges that Australians are facing. They, of course, are dealing with rising interest rates and they're dealing with rising rents, which is why we moved immediately last year to unlock $575 million to get more social and affordable housing on the ground quickly. And it's also why, at the very first opportunity, we brought to the Parliament the Housing Australia Future Fund and other related bills into the Parliament, which is why we want to get these bills debated, which is why we want to make sure that we're getting these homes on the ground as quickly as we can for the people that need them most. We know that on census night in 2021, almost 123,000 Australians were homeless. 123,000 Australians without a safe place to call home. We also know that turning all this around will take some national leadership. We also know that we need to change the levers and we need to work with the states and territories, which is what the Housing Australia Future Fund is all about. It's about working with other tiers of government. It's about working with community housing providers. It's about working with institutional investors to get more houses on the ground more quickly. And today, as the Prime Minister's pointed out, we've heard from some critical organisations about why we need to get this done. Emma Greenhalgh from the National Shelter said, "We badly need government investment and intervention, and time is of the essence. This is a national crisis and action cannot be deferred." Here is a peak body of providers saying that this is urgent, because it is urgent. And of course we have Wendy Hayhurst from Community Housing who said, "We need to get moving on building a better supply of social and affordable housing." And these three pieces of legislation are important building blocks. They know we have to get moving on this quickly because it is urgent. And there are people on the ground who need us to get this done. Kate Colvin from Homelessness Australia said, "It's important that the Housing Australia Future Fund, Housing Australia and other key bodies get going now, because this is urgent. We need to get it done." We are being told by these organisations we need to get it done quickly. So I'd say to members in this place, particularly members of the Coalition over here and members of the Green, talk to your senators. Tell them how urgent it is that we get this done. Talk to some of these organisations. I would say to them, what you're saying is no to actually getting homes on the ground for people that need it most. People that need it most.
Order. Members on my left. The House will come to order. Before I call the member for North Sydney, I'm pleased to advise the House that present in the gallery today is Her Excellency. I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is Her Excellency Ms Shauna K. Richards, the High Commissioner for Jamaica and advocates and workers from the transport sector as well. I give the call to the member for North Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. A single parent with 2 children loses over $100 a week in payments when their child turns 8, and they are forced off the very modest parenting payment single and onto the even lower job seeker payment. What advice does the Minister give single parents, mostly women, many of whom are survivors of family violence, who the government are then forcing to make a choice between living in poverty or returning to violence? And will the government commit in the upcoming budget to restoring access to the parenting payment single for parents until their youngest child is 16?
Give the call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And look, I'd like to thank the member for her question and say that the Albanese government is very much committed to supporting single parents to help them manage work and family responsibilities. And of course, this includes through a range of social security payments, paid parental leave and cheaper childcare. Now, of course, we know, this government knows that Australians are doing it tough, and we are always looking at ways that we can better support them. That's why we've made a number of commitments to help with the cost of living, cheaper childcare. We've cut the cost of the PBS co-payments and, of course, announced the Energy Bill Relief Fund, which will deliver targeted and temporary relief on power bills to eligible households, including those on income support payments. Now, of course, through the social security system, single parents can be eligible for parenting payment, and as the member rightly indicates, as their child gets older, most parents are able to increase their level of employment and reduce their need for income support. Of course, there are still those that do continue to rely on income support as their child gets older and do move to the job seeker payment and receive higher rate as the principal carer to ensure they do get additional support. In addition, single parents also can get a range of extra supplements and supports. I would say to the member, of course, this government is always looking at how we can better support Australians, particularly those on low incomes. And of course, the government has recently established the Economic Inclusion Advisory Committee to provide advice ahead of every federal budget on the economic inclusion and tackling disadvantage. And of course, some of the payments that will be looked at this and do include those being received by single parents, such as parenting payment and job seeker payment, as well as Commonwealth rent assistance. Our government, and I don't understand why those opposite are interjecting, but I can tell you that this government will take those most vulnerable and their living situations seriously. We will consider it through the budget context, and I look forward to continuing to work with the member on how we best deliver to those most disadvantaged in Australia.
Call to the honourable member for Pearce.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How will the 3 major policies the government is progressing this week, the Safeguard Mechanism, the National Reconstruction Fund and the Housing Australia Future Fund, work together to build a better future for Australians?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Pearce for his question and, of course, for her question. And of course, this week we are making progress on all 3 of our signature policies. All 3 of those are ones that we took to the election, to the Australian people last May, and we received a mandate for support. The Safeguard Mechanism is a common-sense way to curb emissions, to give business certainty and stability and get us on a path to net zero. And that's why it's been supported by the Business Council of Australia, by the Australian Industry Group, by the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, by the Australian Conservation Foundation. That's why I thank all members of the crossbench in both chambers who've been constructive about this, who know that we need to end the decade of delay and denial when it comes to climate policy. The National Reconstruction Fund is also very important. We want renewables and cheaper energy to be built and then to flow through to advanced manufacturing in this country. We need to be a country that makes things again here. It's a matter of our national resilience And during the pandemic, we received a reminder of how vulnerable we are if we're just at the end of supply chains. This is about making our future here and creating secure jobs. The Housing Australia Future Fund is about making sure that we have that investment in social and affordable housing, making sure that veterans are looked after, making sure that women and children escaping domestic violence also receive support, and about emergency housing as well. These three policies all work together. Along with our other actions, they're the foundations of a better future. Safeguards ensuring more cheap, reliable, renewable power into our grid, that cheap renewable energy driving an Australian manufacturing boom, boosting new industries like critical minerals. That all working together, training people for those jobs with our fee-free TAFE, our 180,000 places that are making such a big difference. And when I was in the electorate of Aston last week, that certainly through Mary Doyle was very supportive of our plan to train and skill up people in that community. They also have something else in common, because those opposites say no to all three. In spite of the fact we clearly went to an election, two of these three policies were announced as part of budget replies when opposition leaders had policies and alternative policies for the government, but those opposite, no solutions, no ideas, just no.
The call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Every single person in this country wants to see better outcomes for Indigenous Australians. There is no moral high ground and no monopoly on good intentions. Australians have made it clear over many decades that there are no blank cheques on constitutional reform. Will the Prime Minister release all advice from the Solicitor-General and any other legal advisors on the Voice so that Australians can fully understand all of the implications of the proposed change?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for her question, and I certainly agree with the statement that Australians want to close the gap, and Australians want reconciliation to be advanced. I'm asked about legal opinion. The government's position on cabinet papers is the same as the former government, but there is a range of legal opinion.
Order, members on my left.
Legal opinion has been put forward, and words have been put forward. And I want to make this point: the
Order. Members on my left, the member for New England, the member for McNamara will cease interjecting immediately. Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I want to go to where these words have come from that will be put to the Australian people, because the ConCon Alliance developed a proposal in 2014. See if it sounds familiar. Proposing a new chapter of the Constitution. It said this: there shall be an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander body to be called the, insert appropriate name perhaps drawn from an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander language, which shall have the function of providing advice to the Parliament and the Executive Government on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. It then went on in Clause 2 to say, the Parliament shall, subject to this Constitution, have power to make laws with respect to the composition, roles, powers and procedures of the body. They were the two key clauses that were put forward in 2014. One of the authors is the Shadow Attorney-General, who was a part of that body that was put forward in 2014. He's a lawyer. He's a lawyer. And the fact is that lawyers, including the member for Berowra and the Shadow Attorney-General in this country, have put forward that wording, which has been backed up.
I'll hear from the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
A point of order, Mr. Speaker, on relevance. Now, I accept that the question.
Minister for Skills will cease interjecting.
I accept that the question was broad, but what it did not do was invite the Prime Minister to reflect on the opposition. Every part of the question went to the government's approach about this specific referendum.
The question was a long question about legal advice and about the current constitutional reform. The Prime Minister is being relevant, but I'm going to listen carefully to make sure that he is sticking to the question regarding, and it was also about outcomes for Indigenous Australians, and I'll give him the call. Mr.
Speaker, I certainly am. The point is, this has been more than a decade in the making, and the ConCon Alliance included Julian Leeser, Damien Freeman, Marcia Langton, Megan Davis, Greg Craven, Anne Toomey, and Noel Pearson and Shireen Morris.
And the member for Deakin.
Just as the former Chief Justice of the High Court.
Order. Members on my left. The member for Deakin and the Minister for the Environment will cease interjecting immediately or be warned. The Prime Minister has 30 seconds left and I want to hear him in silence.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. The former Chief Justice of the High Court of Australia, Justice French, has made his views very clear in an article in the Financial Review on Saturday, as has Anne Toomey, the leading
members on my left,
the leading constitutional academic in this country, as has the Shadow Attorney General, in terms of the words that have been put forward by the Shadow Attorney General. Simple as that, and I can't understand how that is controversial.
When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for Bennelong.
My question is to the Treasurer. What is the impact on the budget when ongoing programs are left unfunded, and what impact will it have on Australians if funding for these programs isn't continued?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for Bennelong for his question. The budget is 6 weeks away today, Mr. Speaker, and it will be handed down at a time of global uncertainty, cost of living pressures and substantial fiscal constraints. And the fastest growing area of government spending is the cost of servicing the $1 trillion of Liberal debt that those opposite left behind. And so in this environment, there is a premium on what's responsible, affordable and sustainable, and we've been upfront about the pressures on the budget as we methodically work our way through and try and deal with them. In October, we had to find $4.1 billion for pressures that our predecessors couldn't be bothered funding in an ongoing way. And in May, we will have to find billions of dollars more for spending and for programs that they announced but they didn't fund. In MyGov and My Health Records, or dental care for pensioners, the Brisbane Olympics, or e-safety, or radioactive waste. Time after time after time, they were all press release and no provision, Mr. Speaker. Now, the member for Hume was asked about this fakery and trickery today, and he said it's all part of managing the budget. Now, this is what happens, Mr. Speaker, when you put this ringleader for rorts in the key economic portfolio, Mr. Speaker. No wonder they had...
Treasurer will order. Treasurer resume seat. I hear from the manager of
Clearly unparliamentary and abusive language. He should be asked to withdraw.
Just to assist the House, we can ask the Treasurer to withdraw that comment and keep moving.
Mr. Speaker, this is what happens when you put somebody like the member for Hume in the key economic portfolio, Mr. Speaker. No wonder they had almost nothing to show for $1 trillion of debt, and now we know it was even worse than they claimed. Now, the Leader of the Opposition was a key part of the Morrison government as a member of the Expenditure Review Committee that deliberately left Australians who rely on these programs hanging. So, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition, he can hide from the voters of New South Wales, he can hide from the voters of Aston, but he can't hide from his record as a key member of the Morrison government or the mess that they left behind, Mr. Speaker. We take our responsibilities seriously at a time of global uncertainty and cost of living pressures and substantial fiscal constraints. And, Mr. Speaker, it will take more than one budget. It will take more than two budgets to clean up the mess that those opposite left behind. Whether it's the member for Hume or the angry captain of the Cookers over there who bears responsibility for this mess, we take responsibility for cleaning it up.
Order. There's far too much noise on my left. If this continues, people will be warned and they won't be here much longer. Give the call to the member for Wide Bay.
My question is to the Minister for Local Government and Territories. I refer the Minister to her failure last week in Parliament to address regional program delays for local councils. Given it has been 10 months since the federal election and 5 months since the budget, when will councils receive guidelines for the local roads and community infrastructure program so they can plan for critical road upgrades?
Give the call to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories.
To the member opposite. There you go. I think the microphone's on now. It's so great to see members of the LNP on the road to Damascus about guidelines. We know it wasn't a big priority for them previously, but it is great to see that they're interested in guidelines now. 5 months ago we announced our budget. Local roads and community infrastructure is a huge part of that budget, and we know how important it is to local councils. It is an untied grant fund that allows them to deal with community priorities. And what we are doing on this side of the House is engaging directly with local councils, directly with local government organisations and associations. For the first time ever, we are talking directly with them about the things that matter most to them, consulting with our trusted delivery partners in local councils. So far, in the 10 months I've held this role, I've met with nearly 200 local councils. All 200 of them have told me the importance of untied grant funding. All 200 of them have told me that they've spent time and money putting in applications to previous grant funds that were never assessed on their merits by those opposite. In contrast,
the Minister will... The member for Lyons, the member for McNamara. I'll hear from the Leader of the Nationals.
Mr. Speaker, point of order on relevance. The question is very specific about asking for the timeline. It is exactly when will they receive when will they receive those guidelines? Now, the Minister again filed last week, and we're giving it another chance. It now gets to a point in time.
It doesn't quite work that way, but anyway, resume your seat. I'll hear from the Leader of the House.
Oh, sorry, I was rising to object to the add-ons at the end. The question itself refers to local government grants that the Minister's answering on.
The Minister is being relevant because she is referring. Yes, I'm aware that that was part of the question, but it's a broad question of what you asked, and she is referring to the program. You may not like the answer, but she is answering directly relevant because you asked a question about that program. She's referring to that. If she's not, I will bring her back into line and I'll give her the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Back to the answer, if you would care to listen. What I'm telling you is we are consulting with local governments. You failed to do it. We are doing it. We are talking directly to them, and we will continue to do that because local governments are a trusted delivery partner. We brought them back to the table of National Cabinet. We're listening to them. We are implementing the Australian Council of Local Government after you got rid of it. A decade where you failed to understand they are the critical delivery partner across the nation. 546 of them, and perhaps if you took any care at all in your communities and backed their local ideas and understood how they deliver for us, you would be interested in engaging with them too.
Order. The Leader of the Nationals and the member for Page. I hear from the member for Moreton.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. How is the Albanese Labor government working to deliver a successful Brisbane 2032 Paralympic and Olympic Games? What legacy was left by the previous government?
Give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much, Speaker. And can I thank very much the member for Moreton for his question and commend him on his ongoing work on the 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games and ensuring that they are a success and that they leave a lasting legacy across the community. Of course, these Games will be the largest event to be ever held in Queensland, and for 2 weeks the eyes of the world will be on Brisbane and across that fine state of Queensland as the best athletes in the world go head-to-head for the race to gold. Brisbane 2032 will be another opportunity to show the world just what Australia can do. But it has to do more than that. It has to provide a lasting benefit. That's why this government's partnering with the Palaszczuk government to secure infrastructure projects that will have a long-term and transformational impact on Queensland as we count down to 2032.
Order.
The
Members
Queensland government will fund the $2.7 billion redevelopment of the Gabba, while the federal government will provide $2.5 billion for the Brisbane Arena development. 16 new or upgraded venues will receive close to $1.87 billion in co-funding on a 50-50 basis between the two governments. And of course, the Brisbane Arena is planned to be built within the Roma Street precinct with easy access for people of all mobilities to the city bus network. But of course I'm asked about what the legacy is of the previous government when it comes to the Olympics. And that of course can be summed up in one word: absolutely nothing. The previous government did not commit a single cent to the Brisbane Olympics. I went looking when we came into government to see where was the money for the Brisbane Olympics. What we inherited from the previous government was one line in a letter committing the Commonwealth to 50-50 funding. But I went looking, I thought, is it in the previous May budget? Is it in the contingency reserve? Would you think someone, a Queenslander maybe on ERC, would have thought maybe you need to put some money in the contingency reserve for this commitment to the biggest event ever for Queenslanders? But what was there? Zilch. Nothing. Not a single cent provisioned for the Brisbane Olympics. Now, they are full of talk on the other side of the House, and the member for Fairfax may still spruik whatever make-work job he'd made up for himself, but the reality is that their last budget did not commit a single cent to this event, not a single cent. What we inherited from the previous government was one line in a letter, no funding. Well, we know how important the Olympics are to Queensland. The Olympic flame is going to be lit in 2032. Brisbane will be ready, and it will be no thanks to those opposite.
Before I call the member for Flinders, there's far too much noise in the chamber. The member for Deakin, Groom are now warned. You've had a good go. Give the call to the member for Flinders.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The government's deal with the Greens for a hard emissions cap will force up power prices and further risk domestic gas supply. This comes after the Australian energy market operator's warning of gas shortages in Victoria. Can the Prime Minister guarantee there will be no disruption to gas supply to Victorians this winter?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker.
Order.
Only a party addicted to secrecy and cover-ups and denial would say that it's a bad thing that this parliament is prepared to work with colleagues across the parliament in order to achieve reform and change. We make no apologies for engaging across this parliament. It's just a pity that those opposite are now the observers rather than the participants in this parliament. They chose to be nowhere near any of this, and it's no wonder that the member for Bass had this to say: I'm utterly exasperated by the lack of engagement from my own side to come to the table and engage in a constructive conversation. The fact is that we...
Order. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting.
The fact
Fairfax will cease interjecting.
We opposite, I'm asked about arrangements in this parliament in order to achieve the legislation that is through, and what we had what we have from those opposite is ongoing scare campaigns. Ongoing scare campaigns. They said, remember when we met in December, they said this: Labor's diabolical plan, the member for Hume, will undermine new investment in Australia. The Leader of the Nat said it will tear away at investment confidence. The Leader of the Opposition will disrupt investment into our country. Well, have a look at what's happened today on investment.
The Prime Minister will pause. I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
On relevance, a straight question. Can the Prime Minister guarantee there will be no disruption to gas supply to Victorians this winter?
That was
Please
part
give
of
us
the question.
a straight answer,
Resume your seat. The point of relevance is not just to pick out the point of the question that you want asked, it is the entirety. If you want to read the whole question out, that's okay. It's not okay, actually. You just need to state the point of relevance. So the Prime Minister is being relevant. You may continue.
Mr Speaker, today we have had, in the financial review, Canadian giant Brookfield has pledged to invest billions of dollars to accelerate the decarbonisation of Origin Energy after sealing an $18.7 billion deal to buy out the Australian energy and gas supply together with US partner EIG. It went on to say this: the binding agreement puts to bed any lingering doubts in the market that what was the second biggest takeover proposal announced in 2022 in Australia will be derailed by the federal government's intervention into energy markets to rein in one-rate prices. You know, no wonder they're against solar power, because they keep predicting the sky will fall in. That's why they're against solar power, because they keep predicting that the sky will fall in. The sky won't fall in. We had the best solar resources in the world, and we're going to use them.
The member for Riverina, if it continues with that interjection, you'll be warned. When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for Parramatta.
My question is to the Minister for Government Services. Why is it important to support the delivery of government services through the MyGov platform? What are the current financial circumstances of the MyGov platform?
We call to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme and the Minister for Government Services.
Members of the House would be aware that MyGov provides a secure and convenient way to access 15 government services. For example, there are 19 million MyGov accounts which are linked to Medicare. 97% of the claims which people made in the last 12 months for disaster relief are done through MyGov now. 1.4 million people use MyGov on average every day, which is more than people who use public transport to commute to and from work. Wow. And I think MyGov also helps protect people's personal information. And I believe that MyGov will be developed as a trusted system which can be used to verify someone's identity, avoiding the need for private sector organisations to pile masses of data which then can be inconveniently hacked. So the MyGov user audit, which was done this year, was part of our election policy, has proposed ideas which we're currently considering to improve the reliability and functionality, provide a user-friendly experience. It's based on it's built upon David Thodey's independent review of the Australian Public Service, and I think it adds to the roadmap of how MyGov can help achieve a better vision for the delivery of government services and building trust between citizens and their government. The audit thinks that it's an indispensable national digit infrastructure. This is a good story and it's good news, but there is a catch. The previous government decided that the job would be done by the 30th of June this year. The Francis Fukuyama's The End of History people believed that history would end on the 30th of June, that we would reach utopia. That there was no need to do anymore. Mission accomplished, as a former American president said. And when you look at the 2021-2022 portfolio budget statement, there's $92 million in 21-22, good, tick. $80 million
in 22-23.
The Leader of the Nationals will cease interjecting.
But when you look for the next year, there's nothing. And the real import of this, and despite the sort of howls from those opposite, this will split.
The Minister will resume his seat so I can order. So I can hear from the member for Hume.
Relevance, Mr Speaker. The government had a budget in October. They could have included...
Resume your seat. The member for Hume. The member for Hume. That is not a point of order. Just get the Minister to return to the question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So the summary of this issue, and the reason why this is important to people listening to parliament, is the previous government was absolutely guilty in its budgets of cooking the books. They would pretend that they needed to make no provision for the future, and that way they were misleading the Australian people on every budget night, and that habit has to stop.
Give the call to the member for Kennedy.
Water Minister, is the 24,000 kilometres of prickly Nilotica weed tree the worst environmental disaster in our history? Is it reducing what SunMap described as Australia's best natural grasslands into degraded, eroding wastelands bereft of native flora and fauna, dooming inter alia the Western Dunnet to extinction? Minister, has North Queensland's Midwest population fallen from 40,000 to 24,000? Will the Hughenden irrigation scheme be a template for overcoming the degradation and creating the freedom of property and space,
Members,
a nature wonderland of hope, prosperity and excitement?
Has concluded. The call to the Minister for the Environment and Water.
Thank you so much, Mr Speaker. It's wonderful to have a question from the member for Kennedy. I have the opportunity to talk to him often about the issues that he is concerned about in his electorate, and I value this opportunity to talk about the prickly acacia. He is absolutely quite right that prickly acacia is a weed of national concern. It is a serious issue that is degrading the grasslands, as he says, undermining stock on that land, causing erosion, and is seriously putting pressure on dunnuts. If people want to look up Julia Creek dunnut while I'm talking, you'll see a very cute little marsupial. That's why one of the things I've done recently is allow the importation of a new biological control. This new biological control, the gall-inducing thrip, targets the acacia, the prickly acacia specifically. He's also asked about the Hughenden irrigation scheme, and I want to say there are three things that the Albanese Labor government is interested in knowing about the Hughenden irrigation scheme. We are very open to the scheme, as I've told the member for Kennedy on many occasions, but the three things that we've asked for first is an adequate water allocation from the Queensland Government, assessment of the project by Infrastructure Australia and co-funding from the Queensland Government. So I understand that...
The Minister... Order. Members on my right and my left. The member for Page, the Minister for Infrastructure, the member for Longman. I'll give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister has returned, but members are required...
Resume your seat. That is not a point of order, and as the member knows, there are times when she leaves the chamber as well, and members do leave the chamber. I don't think that's helpful or appropriate. Anyway, and those sorts of points of order are disorderly, and if the Deputy Leader continues with that, she'll be asked to leave the chamber. The Minister has the call.
Thank you. It's not the Gold Coast, but Julia Creek matters too. I understand that the water allocation...
Order. Members on my left.
I understand that the water allocation has progressed to the next stage of the water allocation process. I'm told that the proponent has submitted a detailed case to Infrastructure Australia. I understand that the Queensland Government is actively considering the project, so we will always support better infrastructure when it stacks up. Can I remind the member for Kennedy as well that in the October budget we committed $750 million to water infrastructure in Queensland, including $600 million for Paradise Dam near Bundaberg, over $100 million for the Cairns Water Security Project, $11.5 million for better water security planning in Queensland, $3.5 million for Mount Morgan, another $8 million towards Big Rock Weir, another $12.5 million for groundwater improvement and water efficiency in the Lower Burdekin. And can I say, one difference between us and those opposite is when we promise water infrastructure, we deliver it. We won't promise 100 dams, as those opposite did, and deliver 2 in 9 years.
The call to the order. The member for Flynn will cease interjecting. Give the call to the member for Canberra.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry and Science. Why are the national science institutions so important to Australia, and what has caused their current funding circumstances?
Order. The member for Deakin is on a warning. If he mentions one more word, he will leave the chamber. Give the call to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Thank you, Speaker, and thanks to the member for Canberra, like many of us here, are very proud of our world-class science agencies, be they Questacon, be they the Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organisation, be it the National Measurement Institute. They're providing public services that people they rely on every day but may not necessarily realise are there. And here's an example. A few weeks ago, we had an issue where the nation's attention captured by the loss of an object no larger than a 10-cent piece in remote Western Australia, and that object was a radioactive capsule. It needed to be tracked down. ANSTO stepped forward to help with their own device developed in-house. They located that object while travelling 70 kilometres an hour on a 1,400-kilometre stretch of road. It was like ANSTO had found literally one needle in a million haystacks, and it was truly remarkable. And not just ANSTO. You look at Questacon, who play an essential role in inspiring the next generation of STEM students, skills that we'll really need in the economy in the country longer term. The National Measurement Institute, they help keep Australians safe and healthy. They secure the quality of food produce that's exported. They test water quality. They also help support law enforcement agencies with drug testing, and they'll also help in the lead-up to the Brisbane Olympics, making sure that we've got that drug testing working properly. So these are the kind of services that are absolutely relied upon by the Australian public, and we need to ensure that those services that are backed in with patient investment. But what gets me is when you look at the decade of chronic underinvestment by those opposite, and they squeezed vital funding for these agencies that are doing very important work. Under the Coalition's watch, Questacon, their facilities deteriorated, using buckets to catch rain from leaking buildings and affecting the experience, particularly of school students in our area. Under the Coalition's watch, the National Measurement Institute squeezed for money to deliver analytical services we rely upon. Under the Coalition's watch, ANSTO facilities, vital in producing cancer and diagnostic medicines, all those facilities ageing. And it wasn't that they couldn't find the money. $1 trillion debt, sports rorts, building commuter car parks nowhere near public transport, as long as it was in a marginal electorate. They had the money there. They just didn't want to invest it in anything other than their political interest. And that is the worst thing. And the person who leads the opposition, who was on the Expenditure Review Committee helping make those calls, they've learnt nothing, will continue to do the same, and will continue to dud Australians.
Give the call to the honourable member for Barara.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. In the Prime Minister's press conference yesterday, in response to a question about the scope of the Voice's powers, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "The Voice is not about defence policy, it's not about foreign affairs policy." Prime Minister, what other matters are excluded from the remit of the Voice?
Order. Members on my right and left, the Minister for Home Affairs, Member for Barara was heard in silence, and so will the Prime Minister be heard in silence. Here's the call.
Well, a learned colleague once wrote about what The Voice was about, and he said this: he, Noel Pearson, proposes a consultative body that merely provides advice. It cannot veto Parliament, but rather it provides greater input into the policy-making process, which should lead to policy improvements and greater buy-in from Indigenous people across Australia. It is important that if the Parliament is going to make laws about Indigenous people should be consulted about those laws. There is nothing incongruent about articulation of that rule in the Constitution. The Constitution is where rules for Parliament are set out. In my view, the proposal for an advisory body has real merit and sits most comfortably with the nature of the Constitution. It is the kind of machinery clause that Griffith, Barton and their colleagues might have drafted had they turned their minds to it. It was indeed very wise words from the member for Barara in 2016, uphold and recognise. The member for Barara knows.
Order. The members on my left cannot continue to shout while the Prime Minister is speaking.
And Mr Speaker, why members of the Coalition are shouting while I'm quoting the Shadow Minister for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Affairs and the Shadow Attorney-General is just extraordinary.
The Prime Minister will pause. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting. Members on my right will cease interjecting. The member for Lyons. Members on my right. The member for Bennelong. The manager. Well, I can't hear. Someone's trying to raise a point of order. I can't hear because the Leader of the Opposition is interjecting. I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Mr Speaker, on a number of previous occasions you've directed the Prime Minister back to the terms of the question, very specific question, what other matters are excluded from the remit of The Voice? A question asked by somebody who has demonstrated his good faith.
Resume your seat. Member for Hunter. I'll hear from the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, on points of order from the Manager of Opposition Business, consistently he is pulling a section of a question and pretending in the point of order that it was the whole question. It wasn't. And even if it was only that section, the Prime Minister is being relevant to the scope of The Voice.
The Prime Minister is referring to advice and information regarding The Voice, which the question included. So I want to be clear on this. You may not like the part of the question that the Prime Minister is answering, but as long as it is relevant to the broad question, he is able to answer that way. So the Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. And the reason why it is relevant to put into context the development of the proposal to do two things: to recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in our Constitution, and secondly, to consult them, is that this isn't something that has come from nowhere. This is something that has been around for a considerable period of time and been the subject of considerable discourse, including from legal minds, including the Shadow Attorney-General. And indeed, in the report of the Joint Select Committee, the Joint Select Committee tabled in this Parliament.
Cease interjecting.
Seriously.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition, if continues this, will be warned. You cannot continue just to interject constantly. I can't be clearer than that. Same with the member for Greenbury's on a warning. If he says one more thing, he'll leave the chamber. The Prime Minister has the call and will be heard in silence for the remainder of his time.
There have been reports to this Parliament, and indeed the member opposite said this on the speech of the tabling of the Joint Select Committee report in 2018, and I agree with him here. The Voice will provide a mechanism for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to be consulted and engaged on the policies and laws that affect them. Has its goals better social and economic policy outcomes for our First Nations people. I find it astonishing that there's interjections during an answer such as this. The fact is that this has been around. That is the answer.
The member's premises time has concluded. Order. Give the call to member Fremantle.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Government Services. In light of the findings of the Watt report into procurements and contracts in the government services portfolio, why is it so important for publicly elected officials to act with integrity towards those they represent?
Give the call to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme and the Minister for Government Services.
Yesterday I updated the House on issues raised in Dr Watt's review into procurements and contracts entered into by Services Australia and the NDIA. A key thread in this reporting was the presence of de facto lobbying firm Synergy 360, owned by friends and donors of the member for Fadden, Mr David Milo and Mr John McGarrison. Synergy 360 was being paid by companies including Indian software giant Infosys and American technology giant Unisys for access to member for Fadden's office. Leaked emails today in the 9 newspapers reveal that the cash for access business model of the Synergy 360 extended beyond the member for Fadden and his office and to the important Australian Commission for Law Enforcement Integrity, ACLI. It received sensitive briefs on Australia's national security. ACLI at the time was inquiring into the integrity of Australia's seaports and borders. Leaked emails reveal that Unisys had paid Synergy 360 in order for the member for Fadden to help the company set up a commercial pitch of its border security software called LineSight. With an endorsement from the ACLI committee, Unisys were hoping to sell this product to the Australian government. Leaked emails reveal that Unisys was set to make millions if they could reach a deal with the Australian government to purchase this product. Furthermore, these emails reveal that Synergy 360 would also receive 10% of the contract value, plus $10,000 per month retainer. In anticipation of the pitch to ACLI, the member for Fadden was provided by a Unisys executive with information about their product. I quote an email from an Asia-Pacific Vice President of Unisys to the American head office. I told Stuart I'd get him something tonight. Tomorrow at the Joint Committee on the Australian Committee for Law Enforcement, he will be proposing that the committee formally meets with Unisys for a briefing on our work with the US government. Furthermore, the member met with Synergy 360 and his friends and the chairman of his fundraising group and Unisys reps on the Gold Coast at Mr McGarrison's house to help them prepare a run-through for the committee. He lunched with them on the 29th as a thank you from Unisys. He then helped arrange meetings with Unisys, with the ACLI meeting, but also with the now Leader of the Opposition. And I'm not saying the now Leader of the Opposition was aware of all the backstory. All these matters go to the core of the Watt Review, the need to declare conflicts both real and perceived. I think in order to assure the Parliament and the Australian public that he's acted with integrity, the member for Fadden needs to immediately state whether he declared his conflict of interest before suggesting Unisys to make a commercial pitch, and I think the Leader of the Opposition needs to say if he's satisfied with the member for Fadden's conduct in all of these matters which have dominated the front pages of the media.
Give the call to the member for Calais.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Since the days of the gold rush, communities of the Central West have been advocating for a crossing over the Macquarie River at Dixon's Long Point between Orange and Mudgee. With a solid benefit-cost ratio, substantial funding had been committed, cultural heritage considerations were cooperatively addressed and the project had gone out to tender. There was even $27.8 million of allocated funding sitting in the kitty. Where is this money now? Will you and your government support this game-changing project?
The member for Riverina will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister has the member for Riverina is warned. The Prime Minister has the call.
I thank the member for Calais for his question. I also thank him for raising this issue with me when we met in my office a while ago on behalf of his constituents. And I know that he's very passionate about this project to provide a road link between Orange and Mudgee. It is a complex proposal because it does, of course, involve a river crossing, and therefore the costs have been assessed, unfortunately, as being much higher than $27.8 million. Like many of the commitments that were made opposite, essentially you can't fund half a road. You can't just have one side, or you can't have it go just half the way. You need to have the entire funding there, which is why I look forward to, and I've raised the issue with my Minister for Infrastructure and Transport as to whether there would be an interest as well in New South Wales Government, the incoming New South Wales Government also being engaged with this project, or indeed with the Shire councils in that area. I will certainly come back to the member for Calare about this. We have allocated some $23 billion to New South Wales over the next decade for infrastructure projects with substantial investment right across all states and territories. And as the member knows, because I travelled with him to Calare during the natural disasters, which tragically a lot of his electorate was impacted by, we continue to invest where it's needed to deal with the natural disasters that had such a devastating impact, in particular the floods in his community. So I look forward to working with the member for Calare and thank him for the question.
Give the call to the member for Spence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. Why is it important for governments to work together to improve health services, and why are improvements needed?
Give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Spence for his question. He's doing such terrific work in the wonderful northern suburbs of Adelaide, and he understands that this government has no higher priority than strengthening Medicare. We understand, Mr Speaker, that this requires us to work closely with state and territory governments to address the deep range of challenges facing our healthcare system after 9 years of cuts and neglect from those opposite, compounded by 3 years of a global pandemic. We've worked closely with all states and territories, Labor and Liberal alike, to finalise arrangements for 50 urgent care centres that we've committed to deliver this year, delivering care in the community for those non-life-threatening emergencies, extended hours, 7 days a week, fully bulk billed, importantly taking much-needed pressure off our crowded emergency departments. We're also working constructively with states and territories to roll out the Prime Minister's $100 million innovation fund he agreed at National Cabinet. They're delivering a single employer model across rural Tasmania for GP registrars and rural generalists, more nurse practitioners in Western Australia and much more as well. Now, the contrast between this cooperative approach with state governments and the conflict that the last government was addicted to could not be clearer, Mr Speaker, could not be clearer. And no one pushed that conflict model harder than the Leader of the Opposition when he was Health Minister. In addition to his infamous GP tax and his attempts to jack up the price of medicines for every single Australian, he also tried to gut hospital funding. He tried to gut $50 billion from funding to public hospitals, Mr Speaker, $50 billion. He abolished the agreements we had with states to bring down waiting lists in emergency departments and for elective surgery. It's all contained in a release from the Leader of the Opposition as Health Minister titled, I kid you not, Mr Speaker, Strengthening Medicare. Now, I think he meant strangling Medicare, but autocorrect got the better of him. But in that release, he includes perhaps his most extraordinary idea, and I quote, Mr Speaker, the government, their government, will also remove the restrictions on state and territory governments that prevent hospital emergency departments charging a fee for presentation. Charging a fee for presentation. his vision of the fantastic triage nurses of Australia out the front of every single hospital emergency department with an EFTPOS machine to collect the Leader of the Opposition's hospital tax. No wonder, Mr Speaker, Australia's doctors overwhelmingly voted this man the worst health minister in the history of Medicare. And, Mr Speaker, I table a media release from the Honourable Peter Dutton, ironically titled Strengthening Medicare.
I give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
My question is to the Prime Minister and concerns The Voice. Can the Prime Minister confirm, quote, "The Voice is not about defence policy, it's not about foreign affairs policy"?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Oh, right. I thank the member for his question, and they should know what The Voice is about, because for 10 years they were actually the government that established the committees and established the processes and produced the reports that dealt with The Voice to Parliament, that dealt with it. Indeed, the Shadow Minister for Aboriginal Affairs proudly said in his first speech to Parliament, in important public debates, in a time of increasing polarisation of views, we need people who can build consensus and find the middle ground. And in more recent times, I have worked with Indigenous leaders and constitutional conservatives to find a constitutional way to make better policy about and give due recognition of Indigenous Australians while avoiding the downsides of inserting symbolic language into a technical document.
The Prime Minister will pause. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Speaker, on relevance, it was a very tight question. The totality of the question.
Member Lawler.
The totality of the question. My question is to the Prime Minister and concerns The Voice. Can the Prime Minister confirm The Voice is not about defence policy, it's not about foreign affairs policy?
You resume your seat. The issue you've got here, is you started your sentence with, my question is about The Voice. Order. And the Prime Minister has been asked a question. Well, under the standing orders, the Prime Minister is being relevant, because if you ask and state something in terms of the first or second part of the question, he can refer to that. But he was asked specifically, order, about a second part of the question, and before he ends, I'm sure he will address that part of the question. Order. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I'm surprised that quoting the member for Brow's first speech is something that's controversial in this place. But it was about The Voice, his first speech, and he deserves credit for the work that he has done on The Voice, which is why it is so sad that what we see now is an attempt ongoing to raise issues in a way that are designed to undermine the opportunity that Australians have to unite the country in a positive way, just like I offered to the former Prime Minister when we met in his office on the first sitting day of Parliament in 2019. Because bear this in mind, those opposite, prior to the 2019 election, made a commitment to advance The Voice to Parliament. And Ken Wyatt, to his credit, was appointed as the first ever Aboriginal to hold the position of Minister for Indigenous Affairs, and I appointed the Shadow Minister, the member for Barton. And that was to advance—
Order. Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer?
No.
The member for Hume. I'm trying to hear from the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, your words were very clear before. That was for the Prime Minister to answer the question before his time is up. He has 26 seconds left, and he continues to openly defy—
Resume your seat. Thank you. The members on my right will cease injecting. The Leader, the member for New England will cease interjecting. Prime Minister, in conclusion. The Leader of the Opposition. The Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting. So will the Attorney-General. The Leader of the Opposition. The Leader of the Opposition will remain silent for the remainder of this answer. The Prime Minister has 26 seconds to go.
Mr. Speaker, the wording of the referendum, which is put forward for the Australian people, makes it very clear that it's about matters that affect the lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. That's what this is about. That's what this is about, the 10-year gap in life expectancy. It's about doing something about that.
Prime Minister's time is concluded. When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for Chisholm.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. How is the Albanese Labor government building the skilled workforce and supporting students with cost of living pressures, in particular in Victoria? What has been the response to the government's plans?
Give the call to the Minister for Skills and Training.
Thank the member for Chisholm for her question and her strong support for TAFE and the vet sector, not only in her electorate but across the country. Upon election, of course, Mr. Speaker, it was clear that not only we'd inherited a $1 trillion Liberal debt, we inherited a massive skills deficit. And so much so that the occupations on the skills shortage list grew from 153 occupations to 286 in 12 months. The OECD reported that we had the second highest labour shortage per capita amongst OECD countries. And of course we also know, Speaker, that 9 out of every 10 jobs require post-secondary school qualifications. And for that reason we convened a Jobs and Skills Summit. We enacted the Jobs and Skills Australia, and of course we struck 8 agreements with state and territory governments, Labor and Liberal, in order to invest in 180,000 fee-free TAFE and vet places for 2023. Now, I'm happy to say on Friday I accompanied the Prime Minister and the Minister for Early Childhood Education, and indeed the Labor candidate for Aston, Mary Doyle, at Swinburne University, a dual provider that is providing very important courses to fill the skill shortages in our economy. Now, Speaker, these students that we met at this campus are able to save up to $6,960 for these courses. So not only the likelihood of them enrolling in these courses has grown because of the fee-free TAFE approach by the government, but we are seeing these skill shortages being filled as a result of the courses that are outlined. Now, Speaker, on the 1st of July, the Albanese government's cheaper childcare will become a reality, providing even more cost of living relief for around 1.2 million Australian families. But to ensure that we have the staff required, we must invest in skills. And that's what we're doing through this process. All across Australia, students are enrolling in early childhood education courses and other areas of demand to supply these skills. But of course not everyone agrees with our approach to making skills and training more accessible. And I'm asked what is the response by others, and I have to say, I'm afraid to say, that those opposite have referred to fee-free TAFE as wasteful spending. Now, this is a former government that was happy to spend on sports rorts and car park rorts, but they want to say investing in skills in areas of demand is a waste. Well, frankly, Speaker, we will continue to invest in skills, invest in areas of demand so that businesses are better off, that students are better off and the economy is better off.
Time has concluded. Give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
Prime Minister, will the Voice need to be consulted on defence and foreign affairs matters?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. The question that will be asked is a proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice.
Order.
Do you approve this proposed alteration? That's the question. The proposed change in the Constitution is the first bit's the recognition. In recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first peoples of Australia, 1. There shall be a body to be called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. 2. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice may make representations to the Parliament and the Executive Government, the same words used by the Shadow Attorney-General in his submission way back in 2014 of the Commonwealth on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. That's there.
Order.
And then the third clause gives primacy to this Parliament for what will be considered. For what will be considered. And it said,
Order. Members on my right will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister is directly being relevant to the question regarding the voice and the referendum. He is reading information into the Hansard regarding specifically what you asked about. So I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition
Speaker,
Business.
the question could not have been tighter. Will the voice need to be consulted on defence and foreign affairs matters?
Yes. I understand the answer that you're looking for, but the Prime Minister can answer the question how he sees fit as long as he's within standing orders, and currently he is in with the standing orders.
Mr. Speaker, and this goes to what will be considered by the voice. The Parliament shall, subject to this Constitution, have power to make laws with respect to matters relating to the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander voice, including its composition, functions, powers and procedures. This is an assertion of the primacy of the Parliament for what the voice will consider. That is why it is consistent with the views put forward by constitutional conservatives. This is a conservative.
Order.
This is a conservative, modest proposal that has been made even tighter as a result of the additional words that were added between the Garma speech and last Thursday and in the legislation that will be introduced. The two key words there are matters and then including. So the primacy of the Parliament is made very clear by those words.
Order.
Which is what the former Chief Justice
the member for Bowman will leave the chamber under 94A.
has agreed, what Anne Toomey has agreed, what the Shadow Attorney-General knows full well as well, because it's consistent with what he has been saying for years. 4 years.
Order. Give a call to the member for Hunter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to ensure fair long service leave entitlements for workers in the black coal mining industry?
Give a call to the Minister for Employment, Workplace Relations and the Minister for the Arts.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank the member for Hunter for the question and acknowledge many members have been raising with me the way in which casuals are ripped off in long service leave in the black coal mining industry, but in particular I want to single out the member for Hunter and the member for Patterson as being really strong advocates on this. Now, effectively the challenge is this. The long service leave for workers in the black coal industry, they're in an industry where under the award casuals don't exist. Under the award it's only part-time or full-time. But under a series of enterprise agreements, casuals have been established. That's meant its interaction with the Commonwealth law on long service leave means that casuals, even if they work above 35 hours a week, hit a maximum of 35 hours. So if I can explain how that means they end up not getting their entitlements. It's pretty common, for example, in the Hunter, Mount Arthur South mine in the Hunter Valley. A standard roster there will be 48 hours, 60 hours and 24 hours across 4 weeks. Now, for the final of those 4 weeks, you get your 24 hours. For the first 3, even though you're working way above 35, it gets capped back down to 35 hours and you don't get your full long service leave. It's even worse in central Queensland, where the regular roster there in the coal mining industry is 7 days on and 7 days off. And so what then happens is the 7 days on you work way above 35 hours, it gets capped down to 35. In the 7 days off, that's not even part of the average at all. It's just, oh, you weren't working that time at all because you're a casual. This means there are examples now of casuals getting as low as half of the long service leave that they would otherwise be entitled to. Now, me raising this is not the first time this has been raised. There was a report that went to the previous government in 2021 about how to fix the situation for casuals in the coal mining industry. Now, they talked a lot about the coal mining industry, and people might be stunned. What did they do to protect casuals in the coal mining industry? Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Order.
This week, legislation will be introduced because our view is that you shouldn't lose your entitlements as a casual. You shouldn't be in a situation where you're already facing insecurity of work. You're there for long enough to qualify for long service leave, and the insecurity and rip-offs continue into the time that you're having long service leave as well. We have in the members like the member for Hunter and the member for Patterson, we have people who are willing to champion the interest of those workers. But for those who represent the areas I referred to in central Queensland, for those on the opposition, not one has chosen to sought to act on this issue.
Order. Call the Prime Minister.
I ask further questions be placed on the notice paper.
And we'll move to papers.